The Life of David Livingston, Part 12. Dr. Livingston had now been in Africa about 12 years. For 11 years, he had been beyond the borders of civilization, so that when he appeared in Cape Town, taking his family thither for their departure to England, wearing a suit of the same fashions as that which had been worn away from London in 1840, he had to acknowledge that in this respect, at any rate, he had fallen behind the age, and was preposterously out of the mode. And a faraway colony is not the best place in the world at which to procure intelligence of passing events. But with such means of intelligence as were at hand, Dr. Livingston must have been astonished at the greatness and importance of the events which had occurred while had been preaching to the Bokawains, fighting lions, elephants, hyenas, rhinoceroses, hippopotami, exploring vast regions before unknown by means of travel which had been in vogue since the time of Abraham, and amongst a people who had advanced but little, if any, from a barbarism hundreds of centuries old. During the brief period in which the great African explorer was conducting the expeditions of which an account has been given in the preceding pages, more important events had occurred in the world than had occurred in Africa during many ages, and among these were the great inventions and progress in vastly developing enterprises with which his own name was destined to be intimately associated. While Livingston had been inwalled, as it were, within the deserts and wilds of Africa, Europe had been convulsed by revolutionary actions and war. If the cause of popular freedom had not greatly gained, it had at least made way for liberty to gain victories in the future, and this by many deeds of soul-stirring heroism on the fields and acts of statesmanship during temporary control of governments by the great people of revolution. The Republic of the United States had waged a war with the Republic of Mexico, which terminated in success for the stronger party, and in addition of a vast extent of territory, it was during this period that the great empire of Brazil in South America became tranquil and firmly established in independence of the Portuguese Cortes. But far more important events than these, and sure to confer lasting benefits upon mankind, were taking place during this period of Livingston's first series of explorations. It was while Livingston was successful in the good old way of discovery in Africa that Morse was successful in a new way in America. In 1844, the electric telegraph became a practical success. With the practical success of the monumentous invention, the newspaper press entered upon a career of enterprise and influence of which those of former times had no conception. And it is a noteworthy fact that it was one of the greatest newspaper establishments, the New York Herald, whose enterprise at length discovered the great discoverer after he had been given up as lost, and that full particulars of the interesting event by means of the same magnetic telegraph, now connecting continents together in instantaneous intercourse, were at once flashed all over Christendom. But without anticipating the facts that as they existed when Livingston visited Cape Town, were enough to arouse his highest ambition and his best endeavors. Perhaps through him the old and the new might clasp hands. Columbus, in the old way of voyaging, had discovered the new world, now beneficently aiding mankind. Why might not he, exploring in the old manner, and only one possible, prepare the way whereby a continent for so many ages in the gloom of barbarism would let in a light and glorious good of these great trophies of civilization? It will only add one to the many remarkable anomalies of Africa if there the sun should rise in the west after all. Early in the month of June 1852, Dr. Livingston left Cape Town for the country of Mokololo with the object of establishing a missionary station there. He traveled in the usual conveyance of the country, a heavy Cape Town wagon drawn by 5 yoke of oxen. Of course, the journey was slow, nor need it to be said to those who have read the pages which have gone before that it was often accompanied by dangers and difficulties not mastered except by those who have brave natures. In addition to the slow mode of travel, there were several causes of detention, and half the month of January in 1853 had passed before Dr. Livingston left the scene of his long missionary labors among the Bakawanes and again entered the Kalahari Desert. At this season of the year, a hot wind frequently blows over the desert and from north to south. It resembles in its effects the harmattan of North Africa. And when the missionaries first settled here, it came loaded with clouds of red-colored sand. This forms no part of the phenomenon of late years, but the wind blows hot and formerly, appearing to come from some vast oven of the north. It is so devoid of moisture that everything made of wood not manufactured in the country greatly sinks and warps. The atmosphere on such occasions is highly charged with electricity, so that even the movement of the native on his bed of skins will be accompanied by a luminous appearance and often by brilliant sparks. These winds do not appear to bear anything unhealthy on their heated wings. On the contrary, Dr. Livingston expressly avows the opinion that the whole of the countryside adjacent to the desert and from Kuraman to the latitude of Lake Nagami is extremely salubrious and especially healthy and restorative to those who are affected by pulmonary complaints. The journey of the Mokololo country did not pursue exactly the same route either to the region of Lake Nagami or further on as the explorations which have hitherto been described, but it did not differ from them so greatly as to require a detailed narration of its somewhat humdrum incidents. On parts of the journey, the animals of the country were uncommonly tame. Giraffes and kudus came close up to the wagon and the camp by night, and on one occasion a large lion came within 30 yards of the resting place for the night, and went all around it, but so shrewdly that Dr. Livingston was unable to get a shot at him. Early in May, the party reached the reed-walled banks of the Shobe, and after some time he was able, with a single companion, to get a small boat into that stream. The banks of this river are so densely covered with grass and reeds that it is almost impossible to reach the water except at places made by the natives or those huge beasts, the rhinoceros and the hippopotami. Going down the stream with the current, the explorer soon discovers a village of the Mokololo chief Moramai on the north bank. With the assistance of these friendly natives, and the whole party was soon able to move on, and reached Linianti, then the capital town of Sekeletu, chief of the Mokololo. The Mokololo were surprised but greatly gratified when suddenly appeared of the missionary among them. When here before the wagon had been left behind, it was now an object of greatest curiosity, and the whole town, numbering between 6,000 and 7,000 souls, turned out in mass to see the vehicle. Dr. Livingston was received with all the ceremonies of Mokololo etiquette by Sekeletu and his under chiefs. A greater number of pots of boyalata, the beer of the country, were brought forth by the women. Each of them takes a stout draught as she sets down the pot to show that there is no poison. The court herald, then an aged man, who had occupied the office during Sebenente's time, with many bodily antics, roared out a welcome. "Don't I see the white man? Don't I see the comrade of Sebentene?" and a great many other short sentences, the summary of whose meaning was that the white man, companion of the late chief, and good sound sleep were very welcome to the Mokololo. It'll be recollected that Dr. Livingston's journey to the Zambezi, or Liambai, as it was here called, of which account is now being written, was with the object of establishing a missionary station, that at which he had been so long labored at Columbang had been destroyed by the enemies of Sechele and his people, the Bakunanas, and it was at this time, and it was at the time of this journey. It was remembered when Sechele wrote his touching letter to Mr. Moffat, and shortly afterwards, when on his way to see the Queen of England, as he vainly hoped, met Livingston in the desert. Two considerations were regarded by the explorer missionary as essential: healthfulness of locality, which should also not be liable to attack and destruction by enemies of the people, where it should be determined to locate the station. In such of a place, Dr. Livingston spent about 6 months of this time among the Mokololo. During this time, he explored a large extent of the territory and also continued his missionary labors. He led public religious services in the Kotla at Lindenyanti, that is, the place of public meetings and general amusements. He says that the Mokololo women behaved with decorum from the first, except at the conclusion of the prayer, when all knelt down. Many of those who had children bent over them, so that there was a simultaneous scream in all parts of the Kotla, which turned into a universal laugh on the part of the women when Amen was said. This Puchidillo was at length overcome, and the missionary had respectful, if not believing, audiences. He says that among the Bakunanas there never was first-rate decorum. If a woman should happen to sit on the dress of another, the latter would make a vigorous nudge with her elbow and request, "Take the nasty thing away with you," whereupon several women would go on to scolding, and the men emphatically swearing with the object of enforcing silence. There was a good deal of opposition to learning to read among the Mokololo, chiefly arising, it would appear, from a feeling that knowledge would result in the abolition of polygamy, but it was at length overcome and some progress made, though not with Sekateletu, who was obdurate in this respect. He appears to have been uncommonly uxorious, even for an African chief. But before any considerable progress had been made in this regard, Dr. Livingston departed for the west coast. He found much of the country very beautiful, and quite goes into heroics in his descriptions of the valley of the Liambai, inhabited by that branch of the Mokololo known as the Barotose. It is nearly 100 miles in length and in some places 20 or 30 miles wide. It is covered with small villages which are built on artificial mounds, so that during the period of inundation it has the appearance of large lake dotted with islands, thus greatly resembling the valley of the Nile. When the waters of that river overflow their banks, and the current of the Liambanai by in this region is very rapid. On returning from the upper Barotose country to Linantianti, Dr. Livingston floated with the stream 60 miles a day and saw any number of alligators, hippopotami, and other of the large beasts and reptiles of the torrid zone. Having returned from the considerable journey among the tribes of the Liembai and its confluence, the missionary thus records his conclusions upon heathenism and the efforts of religious societies to eradicate it. Quote, I have been during a 9 weeks tour in closer contact with heathenism than I had ever been before, and though all, including the chief, were as kind and attentive to me as possible, and there was no want of food, yet to endure the dancing, roaring, and singing, the jesting, anecdotes, grumbling, quarreling, and murdering of these children of nature seemed more like a severe penance than anything I had before met with in the course of my missionary duties. I took thence a more intense disgust at heathenism than I had before, and formed a greatly elevated opinion of the latent effects of missions in the South among tribes which are reported to have been as savage as the Mokololo. The indirect benefits which, as to a casual observer, lie beneath the surface and are inappreciable in reference to the probable wide diffusion of Christianity at some future time, are worth all the money and labor that have been expended to produce them. Sekeletu, chief of the Mokololo, seems to have impressed Dr. Livingston as a man of considerable natural ability, courage, and generosity. He desired especially to have his country, opened to communication and commerce with white men, but exhibited little or no desire to adopt the Christian faith. It would appear also that Sekeletu's practical ideas had much weight with his distinguished visitor, for we find Dr. Livingston asserting the belief that commerce must accompany Christianity before it can be greatly successful in its conflicts with heathenism and barbarism. Perhaps this opinion had something to do with the hastening forward the explorer's next great journey, that to the west coast of Africa. It is true that other considerations helped to make up the determination. La Lineati is on the river Chobe, and in the midst of the marshy, swampy country, most of the region round about is periodically inundated with African fever, they capitalized in the African fever, which is confusing. The most of the region round about is periodically inundated. The African fever prevails. And here it was that Dr. Livingston was first attacked by this dreaded disease. But against the attacks of the enemies of the Mokololo, Lionanti offered the greatest advantages, and the people could not well be asked to risk great dangers of spoliation and sack even for the rich valley of the Baratose. And hence, at length, the Mokololo chief and Dr. Livingston came heartily to agree upon the explorer undertaking a journey to St. Paul de Lonanda, the capital of the Portuguese colony of Angola, in Lower Guinea. On November 11, 1853, the explorer and party, accompanied by Sekeletu, a train and a considerable number of guides, embarked in their canoes on the Chobe and proceeded down that tortuous stream to its juncture with the Liembai. The route determined lay upon up this magnificent river to the confines of the Mokololo country beyond. The journey against the rapid current was as slow as the late journey downstream had been agreeable. On account of speed, the country every day became more beautiful, however, and many fruit and other trees lent a charm to the scenery, which was not decreased by the sight of voices of innumerable birds, many of which were entirely new to the European. At times, the canoes had to be carried around rapids and cataracts. The falls of Gagne are near the southern extremity of the Baratotse Valley. These falls have not been made by wearing back like Niagara, but are of a fissure form. For many miles below the river is confined in a narrow space through which the water boils and tumbles, making all navigation and even swimming impracticable. There are numbers of islands above the falls, covered with rich foliage and making a scene, as viewed from the rocks near the cataract, of surprising beauty.